Welcome to Redirect Immigration Law and Perspectives, a weekly dive into the world of immigration law and its human consequences. I'm your host, Stephen Robbins, joined shortly by co-host and fellow immigration attorney Matthew Archambault. This week, we are talking about some recent adventures in immigration lawyering, a bond hearing I had recently, and clients who are detained and feeling sick at the Northwest Detention Center. They're being denied COVID-19 testing despite feeling symptoms. Some pretty depressing stuff going on, and a pretty annoying conversation about Biden versus Trump and who we should be voting for. It's hard because Matthew and I have been supporting Bernie for a really long time, and we feel the same things a lot of people out there are feeling about, the entire campaign, the fact that Bernie lost, the fact that Biden, who Matthew put just ahead of Bloomberg at the bottom of the pack, is the presumptive nominee. There's lots to be feeling bad about. At the same time, the differences are real. And if you had DACA right now, or if you were an immigrant of any kind, you would most certainly be feeling anxiety, maybe a little depression about what happened with Bernie, sure, but also a lot of anxiety about the possibility of Trump winning a second term. And so we talk about the differences, and we talk about why it's important to support the Democratic nominee and to continue fighting for progressive changes. This was never going to be over in November, even with the Sanders nomination. Sanders would have been a transformative president, to be sure, but as a politician, he's also been very pragmatic, which is good. And he probably would have gotten a lot of things done, and he would have needed a lot of sustained pressure from the left, to be sure. And so we have to kind of treat the project as having not changed that much. We have to keep doing that work. Anyhow, so that's what we talk about this week. If you like the show, you can subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, leave a review, become a patron at patreon.com/redirect. This last week, I was on the David Feldman show. David has a really good show. You should listen to it. He's very funny, and you might be a little intimidated because the show is like 5 hours long. But what he does is he puts the show out once a week, and it's divided into nice little half an hour segments with all the different guests. And it's actually a really good listen. It's not something you're going to sit down and listen to all at once because it is so long, but it's not 1 5-hour monologue or whatever, like this intro is. Anyhow, so if for some reason you like me or the show, you can check out the David Feldman show, and he might be going back on. I'm not sure. So we'll see. Anyhow, enjoy the conversation this week with Matthew. Now, Matthew.
Yeah. Steve,
we're going to talk about something that's really annoying, but before we do that, do you want to...
Let's not get personal, Stephen.
you want to talk about anything else? Anything that's going on with you? I mean, how are things?
Well, so right before this whole thing started, I thought it'd be really cool to have a second office in New Jersey, kind of close to my house. So I signed a lease for 3 years, and it started on March 1st, which was awesome.
Right.
Because I wanted to get everything ready so we could open it to the public on April 1st. And yeah.
Just beautiful timing all around.
Yeah, so it's always good to have another rent to have to pay during these times.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, you get some of that sweet, sweet PPP money is what I understand. So
I did. Well, I haven't seen it yet, but I got approved. So I was told by my bank.
Well, that's good. I mean, hopefully that goes through and you can pay the bills for another 2 months.
And what about you? Have you heard neither here nor there?
Well, my money was deposited today. So I'm feeling, on the one hand,
was it really?
On the one hand, pretty good about that. On the other hand, we've got a lot of colleagues who are really suffering, and obviously,
so we can edit this next part out. How much did you get?
Money, 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 money.
Nice.
It's nice. Hopefully the business doesn't get hit too hard. And
Yeah, I'm hoping the thing I'm going to get will cover all my expenses except for my pay for a month and a half. So that will get me through, I guess, basically June, right?
right.
Yeah, and the business has dropped off, but it hasn't stopped. So hopefully that stays the same. But we're just about out of this. Yeah, I mean, I think probably by this time next week, we'll be packing football stadiums and baseball stadiums, don't you think? I mean,
right. Well, I listened to that press conference yesterday and they were saying, I think it's phase 3 when we can start to have big events with large crowds, but more spacey. Like, how's that going to work? I don't know what that means, but I like the lack of a plan. There's a really good episode of The Weeds, which is another podcast about the sort of plans put out by experts for getting back. And the host, his point is sort of like he studied these plans hoping they would be comforting, and it was the opposite. It's like more depressing than our current reality. But anyways, So I think it was last week I was celebrating because I got one of my clients out of detention. After 3.5 years, they let him out. And today I've gotten multiple release requests denied by ICE for detainees who either have no criminal record or have been deemed not a danger by the immigration judge, but they just think their flight risky. They might, disappear.
Yeah, I mean, you can't let them all out, Stephen. Who's going to pay the bills?
Yeah, it's really disappointing. The one client is symptomatic. He says he's been having fever, chills, body aches, sore throat. And
sounds like he's a danger now.
Now he is a danger. He went to the doctor there and they're not getting tested. This is at the Northwest Detention Center, unless they're basically dead. Like if you're right about to die, then they might test you. And then probably they'd hide the results. I don't know. But so it's really frightening. They're packed in there pretty tight. There's over 60 people with 6 sinks, I think. So teeth brushing, hand washing, all that stuff. There's 12 people in a pretty small room and bunks, and it's terrible. And the fact that they're not really aggressively pursuing alternatives to detention at a time like this is really disturbing. Are you dealing with any detainees right now?
So I don't have anyone in detention, thankfully. But yeah,
immigration brag.
Well,
I got all my clients out before this happened, so
I haven't been doing a lot of detained work in the past couple of years. I've been really selective on it. Just, I don't know. It's from a business standpoint, it's usually not a great financial arrangement for us. Very few people can pay enough money for a detained case to make it a good business decision, right? So now I only take them if I'm really interested in the case. So, and they haven't come along too often. And I'm actually pretty glad I don't have any now. My last person was released during this, but right at the beginning of this whole thing. And it was basically a pretty straightforward bond issue. So I know a lot of, my colleagues around here are dealing with the same thing. We have outbreaks in all the detention centers, and it's really scary.
Right.
I did have one guy who was in detention, by the way, who got deported to Honduras. So maybe that's why I don't have many people in detention. They get deported.
Right. They do tend to share your name around once you've had a couple decent outcomes, and then the referrals start coming in. So
I don't get my name.
Maybe nobody's been calling for a reason.
Well, I mean, it was sad because this guy, he was starting to feel sick, and they often sent him to Honduras. And there was, at one point, he had a case pending with the BIA. We had to make a decision if I was going to file a stay for him, but we actually decided with the family that it was actually more dangerous for him to stay detained here than to go back home he wasn't feeling it in detention. And
Right.
even if we got to stay, it seemed unlikely that they were going to release him. So,
is there a detention center real close to you geographically, or how far is it?
So in Pennsylvania, there's 2 that are 2 hours and 2.5 hours. And then in New Jersey, it's about an hour and a half.
Yeah, so that's part of it.
Yeah, it's hard.
We don't do too much detain work because it is about 2.5 hours away, but we've been getting some referrals. And it was actually kind of weird. We had a bond hearing yesterday, and this is a judge who I've had sort of a long, well, he probably thinks it's normal, but to me, we disagree a lot.
Really? That's weird.
Yeah, it's weird. But that's okay. I mean, it's an adversarial
Is he a
system.
listener?
I don't think so, but
you want to shout out?
I'm not going to give a shout out by name, but to his credit, the bond hearing was pretty quick. He seemed to be in a hurry to sort of, these detained judges don't want to be there. And he was, it seemed to me, eager to move things along in a way that was not skipping over anything important. I mean, we hit all the highlights and the main points. And then he granted the bond that I asked for, which always makes me feel like I should have asked for less. But he seemed more interested in getting people out, which to me seems like the default should be, how can we really make sure we get these people out of here? I could be wrong. I mean, maybe I just did such a good job that
No, that's not it.
That can't
so
be it.
Different situations bring up different perspectives for people. So seeing this, and he's probably feeling some trepidation walking into his work, right? It's weird now when you go outside, there is some type of trepidation, especially if you're going to go to the store or somewhere. It's like, oh, do I have my mask? Do I have my gloves? All this. So he's going into a detention center where he's thinking a lot of people close together, this stuff could spread. So I'm sure he's feeling it, and I'm sure maybe that gives him a little better perspective, a little more empathy for the people he's dealing with.
I think that's right. Now, you'll like this part. At the end of the hearing, I said, Your Honor, I want to respectfully request that the government attorney and that the court be sure that the order is properly filed with ERO, Enforcement and Removal Operations, because we've had clients before show up to Yakima to pay, and they're there all afternoon with the Yakima officers insisting that it's not in the system yet. So we just want to make sure.
So that's a universal thing.
I just want to make sure it gets properly filed. And then the judge says, well, Mr. Robbins, I don't know why you would think your client should get preferential treatment. You were very busy. Everyone, he goes on this thing about, why do I think my guy is so special that he should jump the line, essentially? And I said, well, no, I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm just asking that the basic function be performed. And then guess what?
They it up.
It wasn't. So they spent all afternoon at the Yakima field office. And then finally at 3, they were just like, yeah, no, like it's not in the system. So I called around. The court said they gave it to ERO. ERO says they didn't have it. Well, anyways, whatever. It's also one of those things where like the Yakima officer was not going out of his way, I'm sure, to like call and find out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, the last bond I did, the same thing happened. And coming from the guy's family, there was one officer who's like, oh, it's not there. And that officer left. And then another officer came by and they asked him and he did something and it was there. So,
right.
Maybe it wasn't there when the first officer looked at it and it was there when the second officer, but probably was there when the first officer looked. He just didn't do it right.
I had that happen once. I sent my assistant to drop off a stay and he, handed it to an officer. They're supposed to bring out the receipt and he was there literally all day. And then like at 4:30, an officer comes out and is like, who are you? What are you doing here? And the officer he'd given the paperwork to went home 4 hours earlier. So something ridiculous. It's just like, come on, guys.
So we didn't come on here to talk about how inefficient ERO is.
Right. We love ERO for the most
part. They are wonderful. And honestly, if any people from ERO are listening, I hope they're being safe. and their family is safe during this time.
Yes, that is true. Same. We did want to talk a little bit about this. Now, you got in trouble. I'm always lecturing you about like, don't bring up Facebook beef on a show that, several hundred people listen to. They're not going to follow. But you did get in a little bit of a Facebook beef. You got in a little bit of trouble because you got a little bit lectury about the hypothetical left-wing Sanders voter who sits out this election because their preferred candidate didn't get nominated. And you had some Bernie supporters get upset, saying that you weren't giving them enough time or space to grieve, to get through this tough time, which you and I can
Do we need
appreciate.
a trigger warning before we go on?
We might need a trigger warning.
Yeah.
I'm getting a lot of pushback on these types of conversations because people don't like being told who to vote for. Now, I will just say as an aside, early in the campaign, when I was saying some nice things about Elizabeth Warren, without saying I would vote for her, just complimenting her, people had no problem telling me exactly what they thought of my comments or who I should vote for.
And when each Democratic candidate dropped out, there were many people who were dunking on them and maybe not giving them time to grieve.
Right.
You may have remembered that.
Having said that, I do want to give people space because, Sanders had the potential to be a transformative candidate and president, and you and I have been advocating for him since 2015. So it's been hard for us too, and we certainly don't want to tell people who to vote for or that they must vote for. People don't like that either. But we do want to talk a little bit about this idea that is out there, which is that Biden sucks and they're basically the same, or that this is an election that is more or less inconsequential. So let's bite into that hot, juicy take.
I do love Bernie Sanders. And I wish this was a conversation about comparing and contrasting Bernie and Donald Trump.
Right.
But we can't have that conversation because that's not where we're at. So we have to talk about Biden. And we kind of have to put Bernie to the side. And hopefully Bernie stays active and he's pushing his ideas. And that type of energy can be used to hopefully influence Biden in the next administration. But right now we deal with Biden.
Right. And there's a few things I think that we can stipulate to from the outset. One, Biden does, in fact, suck. Most politicians suck. Even Sanders, in certain ways, it's not always easy to admit when you're a supporter, but was less than perfect or had to evolve his views very late in his political career. But Biden is especially onerous for some really big reasons. And you and I covered pretty exhaustively the failures of the Obama administration in terms of immigration. This is an immigration show, so we'll try and keep it to that particular issue. But we talked a lot about that going back to 2014, I think is when we started. So, but, sometimes we have clients who will say, well, I'm worried about the risk of applying for a green card because I'm putting my information on a piece of paper and I'm sending it to the government. And it's like, okay, there's some risk involved in an action like that, but they often are failing to take into account the risk of doing nothing, right? So you have to compare the two different things. And so if you're just going to send a list of the failures of the Obama administration or Joe Biden, that's fine. But we're at a point of comparing two different things, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I would say there's a concept called worse. So let's talk about who's worse. And it's sad that we can't talk about who's better because I don't really think that conversation is relevant here. I think Trump is worse in every aspect of immigration than Obama and now what Biden would be. In fact, I cannot think of one part of immigration where Trump and Obama or Biden would be the same.
Right.
Can you think of something where you can say, okay, that's kind of a wash?
No. And in fact, like, it'd be one thing if, they're separating families at the border and they're sending asylum seekers to Guatemala. That seems weird. But the green card application process has been streamlined and is actually very efficient. That would be still a bad argument, but it could make things interesting if there were things falling on both sides. But one thing we've tried to highlight on this show is that from the very, very big things, the asylum seekers being deported to Guatemala, family separation, all these ideas that are huge and life altering that are getting people killed, literally killed. From that all the way down to the smallest minutia, everything is worse, like objectively worse.
Yeah, I mean, even if you go to the employment side, and neither of us do employment, maybe it'd be interesting to have a show where we can have someone who does employment to kind of outline how that sector has really been ravished. But, H-1Bs are more difficult. Everything, just everything that he either dismantled or willfully ignored huge parts of the immigration system. So it's a lot less efficient. Trying to get in touch with someone at the National Visa Center and do simple things like pay fee bills so people can go and have their paperwork that's being done overseas processed is now horrendous. It doesn't work.
Right.
So every aspect is worse. And I can't imagine that Joe Biden is going to come in and make anything worse than it is now. If people are listening and thinking they can think of something, and I'm being sincere, let us know, because I can't think of one area where Joe Biden is going to be worse than Trump.
One of these small things, so by calling them small, it seems like maybe it's not that big of a deal, but they can be life altering and they can serve as per se barriers to basic relief. So, for example, starting, I don't know, some point last year, affirmative asylum applications. So, if you're just here, maybe you flew here from Venezuela and you're afraid to go back because you were involved in some student marches and then you've been threatened by the police there. And so you want to apply for asylum. They will now reject your asylum application if every single box on the form, which is like 18 pages long, isn't filled out. So maybe you have no kids, but there's a page and a half for kid 1, kid 2, kid 3, kid 4.
You can just check that box that says no children, and they understand that you don't have children, so they'll move on to other things, right?
No. Yeah, there's a box that says how many children do you have. You could put 0, and in the past, you just leave those pages blank. Well, now you need to put either none or N/A in literally every single one of those boxes. And it's a form that's in English, and you have attorneys now who are experienced practitioners getting these forms rejected, 2, 3, 4 times. And so for somebody who can't afford a lawyer who has a really good or, a really strong asylum case, it's virtually become practically impossible to just get the thing filed and received.
So, okay, people might think, oh, well, what's the big deal? They send it back. You do it. I know it's an inconvenience, but if you don't have it filed within 1 year, you could lose your chance to get asylum. It is really a big deal and really, really aggravating. I mean,
right.
There's like getting a big packet. And the thing is, they'll send back a 300-page packet, right? Because you didn't put NA in the guy's middle name because he doesn't have a middle name.
Right.
And they'll send the whole thing back.
Right.
And then you just have to do it again. And they send it back at, quite an expense. They don't get free shipping. They have to pay for it. And it's just so frustrating. Instead of sending like a little slip of paper, it says, hey, this information is needed. Send it to us. But it's not only asylum applications. Now it's U visas and T visas that they're doing this as well. So, but it is that bureaucratic barrier that people are facing now. And why they're deciding to do this, I don't know. I mean, I think I know.
Yeah, I mean, you could imagine a scenario where like they get more strict about form filling because, maybe some forms are not filled out very well or whatever. But this is, very clearly the purpose behind this is to just prevent people from applying for relief that the administration doesn't like. Because if you file an asylum application and you don't list children because you've already indicated on the form that you have 0 children, there's nothing unclear or complicated about understanding what's going on that requires them to mail it back and get clarification. So the purpose is clear. And again, that's one thing, but there's dozens of these. And it's really aggravating. And the one that I keep coming back to in my head is DACA. And you and I have talked about the failures of DACA, that DACA kind of sucks. It's just a work permit. They've got to renew it every 2 years. They must feel like strangers in their own land, these kids who came here as children. But Obama, because of the pressure of activists, did provide this pathway for people to get work authorization, to get social security numbers, and in some instances to help them get their green cards through advanced parole and to make it easier for them to get green cards once they were married specifically. And Trump, in his first year, announced that DACA was over. Now it's been tied up in the courts ever since, so people who had it are still renewing. But it's now in the hands of the most conservative Supreme Court in the history of the United States. And we've had high-ranking ICE officials saying, well, yeah, once DACA is over, there'll be essentially some sort of priority for removal, or, they could be considered for removal. And Biden very clearly wants to keep DACA. He said it. There's no reason to think that he wouldn't want to keep DACA. He was part of the administration that created it. And the current administration definitely doesn't want it. So we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people whose lives could be dismantled in very serious ways. And if that was the only difference, if Biden was the same as Trump in every other way, it'd still be worth voting for Joe Biden.
I guess the counter argument is that if we really want to see transformative change in the country, that voting in Biden is actually going to be more of an impediment than reelecting Trump. Because you vote in Biden, it's really the status quo. And yes, there might be some big things that we're interested in that will suffer, but it's what's going to do it. It's going to lead to someone worse than Trump later on. I think that's the argument. But what's your counter argument, which is intuitive to me, but
yeah, that was kind of the thinking for a lot of people in 2016, right? That 4 years of a really bad president would sort of teach the Democrats a lesson. And it hasn't. And we're here now. So, we have to deal with the choice that's before us. And the other thing is, I have very little patience, I guess, for people who want to be the sort of Nostradamus of political futures. And it seems weird that their predictions usually go along the lines of whatever bad position or good position, whatever they currently hold. So they're trying to make an argument against voting for Biden. So, of course, the hypotheticals they'll come up with perfectly line up with the thing that they want to do. So if Biden's elected, it's going to necessarily lead to some worse version of Trump. I don't know how you could possibly predict that. And if Trump wins, then something, a magical progressive candidate will win in another 4 years. And it just, you just can't know that. And, if we're going to just deal in random hypothetical outcomes, well, you could say Sanders is going to win. He's going to be totally hamstrung by an adversarial Congress. None of his agenda will get passed. He'll be seen as ineffective, and he'll be a one-term president, and he'll do more harm to the left-wing movement than if he hadn't won at all. You could imagine a scenario where that's the truth, I guess, but you can just imagine any scenario. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me personally.
I mean, you could imagine a scenario where Biden wins, we move away from Trump, things are eased somewhat, and he takes to heart things that Bernie has been pushing because he sees that there is that movement there, and that does have some energy. And he moves himself, and the country starts to move a little bit to be a little bit more progressive. And it paves the way for more progressive candidates in the Senate and the House of Representatives and state and local government. And then that really eases up and makes it more likely that we get a more progressive president later on.
Right.
Now, some people are going to listen to that and say that's absurd. I don't know.
It's possible.
Trump getting elected is absurd. And it happened. So,
right. And I do want to say I've been thinking a lot about just the value of having people in the room in terms of trying to get things done. And it was very frustrating. We had a show, I think it was in like 2015, where we had David Leopold and who's the other guy? Matthew Culkin.
Matthew Culkin, my good friend.
And, and Matthew Culkin's kind of a libertarian, and David Leopold was he the president of AILA, or he was
president of AILA, but he is like your classic Hillary, Joe Biden.
He was an Obama guy. Yeah.
Yeah, establishment Democrat.
Yeah, he was an Obama guy.
By the way, both excellent attorneys. So
yeah, for sure. David was working to try and effectuate change from the inside. And he, had meetings with the Obama administration, and on some things like DACA, they were successful in pushing for. And on other things, they were not successful and they failed in getting things done. But David was in the room and he had a chance to be heard. And I don't think people quite understand the degree to which we've been completely shut out of any type of conversation with the current administration. I mean, I keep hearing people say, well, the Biden administration would not listen to leftists and working class interests. And it's like, yeah, that is probably going to be true most of the time. But there will be a voice in the room. I really do think.
I mean, Trump is listening to CIS and FAIR, these two right-wing, white nationalist interests. And that's who's in the room right now with Stephen Miller. Ayla is not in the room.
Right. At all.
Yeah. None of these people are in the room.
Yeah. One of the first things that they did, just talking about the many little changes along the way, was to end most liaison meetings. So we used to have meetings with the other side, with government agencies, to say, like, this is kind of working or this isn't, or you need to be better about this. And they were, again, not always responsive, but at least sometimes responsive. And now those meetings don't even exist. Just talking about this bond that I had and ERO, enforcement and removal operations at the detention center, they don't answer their phone anymore, like at all. It might as well not be a phone. So getting shut out completely has consequences. And when you're allowed in the room, again, you're not always going to be heard. You might even not be heard most of the time, but there's going to be some opportunities for you to push for transformative change. So I don't know. I mean, this is frustrating because I hate Joe Biden. So it's not like I'm taking great pleasure in this, but I did want to mention Stephen Miller because he has, they released these or leaked these emails that he'd sent to Breitbart when he was a staffer for Jeff Sessions. He emailed Breitbart something like 900 times, and he mused about sending immigrants back to Mexico on trains and doing all kinds of things. And from all accounts, the worst types of policies that we're seeing out of this administration are coming straight from him. I mean, he's the singular voice that's being listened to on immigration. And even if the only difference between Biden and Trump were that Biden would replace Stephen Miller with somebody who's not a Nazi, then it'd be worth it.
Yeah.
It would be worth it. I don't know.
No, I mean, I think you're right. I think we're right. And I'm not a big fan of Joe Biden. I don't know if I hate him as much as you hate him, but certainly he's not my choice at all. I mean, I think if we were ranking the people that ran, I think he would be like right above Michael Bloomberg for me, but they would be the two bottoms, right?
Right.
I mean, I would much prefer John Delaney just because that guy could actually win a push-up contest.
Yeah, right. He's not going to go around just challenging people.
And then, he'll do it.
And then backing out. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, he would have been on the floor throwing down. That's right. I agree with you. The other thing I was going to say is the Bernie theory of change was never like, get me elected, and then we can all basically take a 4-year break and just kind of chill out. When you talk to most Bernie supporters, they understood that even stuff that was critical to his plans, like Medicare for All, or these other things, they require transformative change to the very makeup of Congress, which is a project that, wasn't going to be done in 2020, probably not in 2022, maybe in 2024, like literally getting new people in Congress, which requires a great deal of prolonged heavy lifting. And so that project has to continue. And it just seems obvious to me that with that sustained effort in a Democratic president, you're going to be able to avoid certain barriers that you won't under a Trump presidency. One is the Supreme Court. I mean, whatever great legislative wins you have coming down the road from a progressive standpoint could very easily be knocked down by the Supreme Court. So that's got to be part of this overall long-term strategy. Right?
Well, I would say to all the Bernie supporters, you may want to look at the Democratic Party and realize that you may be in the wrong party. I'm probably going to leave the Democratic Party. I'm not going to become a Republican. And most likely I'll probably vote mostly for Democrats. But I do see that my values don't really fit within the Democratic Party. It's more aligned to my values in the Republican Party. So I think this process has led me to that conclusion, but it doesn't lead me to the conclusion that I should not vote or I should vote for some third party. If this was just like a George Bush Sr. crappy president that we had, then maybe I wouldn't be as exercised as I am. But this is the worst president, leader that this country has ever seen. And you think he's bad now, reelect him.
Right.
Reelect him. And then let's see the real show.
Right.
So what about vice presidents?
Does it matter? Is that what you're asking?
I don't know. I mean, I think it matters somewhat, especially maybe people look at it a little bit more importantly this time because I don't think Joe Biden's going to be able to campaign ever again because of the coronavirus. He seems a little frail. So maybe it's more important.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
besides John Delaney, which would be mine and yours absolute first choice, right?
Right.
Who would you choose?
I don't know. I don't know. Some people say Tammy Baldwin would be good. I think you want somebody who's progressive, who can, be campaigning, who can speak for more than 2 or 3 minutes at a time without looking at notes. I mean, I don't know. But I don't think you want to go straight vanilla Tim Kaine, that sort of thing. I think you want to satisfy the
Well,
disaffected, because I mean,
it's going to
there
have to
are a
be
lot
a
of people.
female, right? I mean,
That's what he's supposedly come out and said he would do. I mean, he did say that he would do that, but I mean, who knows? Yeah, I think there's people that could hurt and people who could help, and then a bunch of people in between who aren't going to move the needle too much. But it is an interesting argument to be having, because I mean, I'm not even confident that he can make it to the convention in terms of his mental health. I mean, he
but what about like
doesn't
Amy
seem.
Klobuchar? She does nothing
Yeah.
for me, absolutely nothing.
Mhm.
But people
Well,
keep,
that's because you have a problem with strong women.
I have a problem with the women who have that shaky voice. She always seems nervous.
Yeah, she does seem a little nervous. She doesn't do a lot for me personally. I didn't like that she tried to go stand-up comedian as her sort of
Oh,
persona.
and she's not funny.
She's not funny. And there were these stories about her being a terrible boss. And I really did wish that, even if it was just to see what would happen, I always wanted her to just lean into that and be like, yeah, I'm going to throw a binder at you if, this is the US Senate. It's a high pressure job. And if you can't handle your business, you better watch out for a stapler. It's coming right for your forehead. And I kind of thought that that would have been interesting, but she went the other way with it. And I don't think she motivates anybody. Nobody's going to be like, I was unsure about Biden, and now, the Klobuchar thing really ties it up for me. I don't think that's the case. So we'll see.
Yes, we will.
Anyways,
So, yeah.
I really hate having this conversation. So I think we should stop talking about it for a while. But I do want people, and honestly, like the whole let them grieve, give them space, I would totally do that. The problem is every day I wake up and I see somebody making the argument that they're the same or they're not going to vote or whatever. And oftentimes immigration gets brought up and I have to step in and say, like, it's fine to talk about the failures of the Obama administration, but please, please, at this point in time, at this point in history, do everyone the favor of painting the contrast. You have to do that second part. Because if you don't, you're leaving hundreds or thousands of people with the impression that there's a negligible difference or no difference at all. And that's malpractice given the stakes. So,
Yeah, it gives me a lot of anxiety to think that Trump is going to get reelected. So, for all the anxiety it induces in people to talk about Joe Biden, just understand. I mean, I get palpitations. I mean, it keeps me up at night. I wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it. It's no joke. I mean, I'm not trying to be funny here, or it really stresses me out. It stresses out my wife. It stresses out my entire family. I know it stresses out my clients.
don't you have staff with DACA? I don't mean to call them out, but I mean, yeah. Imagine having a mortgage and a decent job and knowing that could all be gone if the wrong person wins. That would
Yeah. So,
be really
again, we're upset that Bernie is not the nominee. We are. It sucks. It does. I don't have the power to change it. So I'm going to go with what we have. And if you think what we have in Trump is the same as what we're going to get in Biden, yeah, I don't know. I can't, I think you have more energy to talk to those people than I do. But yeah, you have to be honest when you say, oh, Obama put kids in cages. Yeah, absolutely. And did Trump get them out of the cages? No, it was worse. So and hopefully now Biden will be better. I don't know. But he's not going to be worse than Trump. It's just not. It's not going to happen.
right. And the thing we've talked about, the fear that a Democrat could come in and leave certain things in place, that's the pressure we're talking about. Whether it was Bernie, whether it was Biden, there was always going to be a need after the election to be on top of the winner in order to push the government out of these terrible positions they're currently taking. And so it's going to take a sustained effort. But I'll tell you one thing, if Trump wins, it doesn't matter how many people you get marching outside of the White House or protesting or letter writing. They're not bringing DACA back. They're not going to stop the deportations of people with DACA. none of that's changing. So you better have some really smart game theory prediction about how after another 4 years of this, the country will magically be snapped into agreeing with the Bernie agenda. I mean, I just don't see how that works. But anyhow,
Yeah, so
we're repeating ourselves, so we should wrap this up.
all right, Mr. Robbins.
Really good talking to you.
Nice talking to you. I'm glad you got your PPP cash.
You too. Take care.
You too. Have fun.
Love you. Bye.
Love you more.